I was wrapping the pie when I heard my son's voice in the other room, and something in the way he laughed made me stop. Not because the laugh was cruel. It wasn't. It was easy, casual, the kind of laugh you give when you're comfortable. But I had been standing at that kitchen counter for 40 minutes, pressing the fork tines along the crust the way his grandmother taught me. And he hadn't looked in once. Not once. I set the fork down and looked at my hands, flour on my knuckles, a small cut from the tin on my left thumb. I was 64 years old and I had driven 3 hours to spend Thanksgiving with my son and my daughter-in-law, and the pie was my idea because I didn't want to show up empty-handed. I never showed up empty-handed. That was the thing about me. I never did. My name is not important for this story. What matters is who I was at that moment. A woman who had spent the better part of 40 years making sure everyone else had enough before she sat down. My husband had died 11 years prior, a Tuesday morning in February, quietly, the way he did most things. After that, I kept the house. I kept his shirts in the closet for 2 years before I could touch them. I kept going. My son, I'll call him by what he was to me, my son, because that is all that matters, had moved to Atlanta 8 years earlier with his wife. She was from there originally, and I understood. People go where they belong. I told him that at the airport when he left. I meant it. I was proud of him for building something. What I didn't expect was how slowly the calls would stop. It wasn't sudden. That's the thing no one tells you about being left behind by your own child. It doesn't happen in a day. It happens in small reductions, like someone slowly turning down the volume on a radio until you realize you've been straining to hear for years. First, the weekly calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. Then the texts were just responses. 1 word, sometimes 2. Good. Busy. Okay, Mom. I stopped counting birthdays by the cards I received. I started counting them by the years since anyone had been in the same room with me when the candles were lit. My daughter-in-law was not a villain. I want to be clear about that. She was a woman who had her own life, her own mother, her own way of ordering the world. She just didn't have much room in that ordering for me. I saw it the first time I visited them in Atlanta, 4 years after they moved. She had arranged the bookshelves, the kitchen drawers, the throw pillows on the couch with a precision that said, "This is mine, and everything in it is chosen." I was not unchosen exactly. I was just not chosen. The Thanksgiving invitation came in October. My son called, which was already unusual enough that I sat down when I saw his name on the screen. He sounded bright, upbeat, the way people sound when they've rehearsed what they're going to say. He told me they were doing a big dinner this year. His wife's cousin was coming, and her aunt, and a couple from their neighborhood. He said it would be nice to have me there. He said my daughter-in-law had suggested it. That last part, that she had suggested it, is the part I turned over in my mind for days afterward. I said yes immediately. I didn't let myself think about it too long because I knew if I did, I would talk myself into caution. And I was tired of being cautious with my own son. I told my neighbor Agnes, not in the file, I'm using that name now. I told Agnes I was going to Atlanta for Thanksgiving. She said that was wonderful. She asked if I wanted her to water the plants while I was gone. I said yes, and I drove to the pharmacy and bought 2 bottles of good hand lotion to bring as a gift because I didn't know what else to bring that wouldn't seem like I was trying too hard. I drove down on the Wednesday before, 7 hours, because I stopped twice and I'm not the driver I used to be on long stretches. I had my audiobook and my travel mug and I told myself this was going to be good. This was going to be the turning point. Some families need distance before they can come back together, and maybe we had just needed this time. I believed that. I want you to know I genuinely believed it. Their house was a colonial on a quiet street with Bradford pear trees out front. Beautiful. The kind of house you drive by and imagine the life inside is as composed as the landscaping. My son met me at the door. He hugged me, a real hug, and that almost undid me right there on the front porch. How much I had missed being hugged by him. My daughter-in-law came out from the kitchen. She smiled. She said it was good to see me. She showed me to the guest room and pointed out where the extra towels were and where I could find water in the night if I needed it. All of it in that efficient tour guide way that means the hospitality is genuine but the intimacy is managed. I said, "Thank you." I meant it. That first evening was pleasant enough. We ate takeout Thai food because my daughter-in-law said she needed to save her energy for the cooking tomorrow. And we watched something on television, and my son fell asleep on the couch the way he used to as a boy. And I sat there looking at his face and thinking, this is enough. Just this. The next morning was when things began to shift. I woke early, as I always do. 6:30, the light just coming through the curtains. I went to the kitchen to make coffee and found a note on the counter. My daughter-in-law's handwriting, neat and slanted. It said she'd gone to the grocery store for a few last things and would be back by 8. My son was still sleeping. I made the coffee. I found the mugs without asking, because I had memorized where things were from previous visits. I stood at the kitchen window and watched a cardinal on the fence post outside, and I thought about my husband the way I always do when I'm somewhere quiet in the early morning. He would have loved that bird. When my daughter-in-law came back, she had 4 bags of groceries and an energy about her, the kind that comes from having a plan and knowing exactly where every part fits. She thanked me for making coffee. She asked if I had slept well, and then she said something that I replayed many times later. She said, "You know, we were thinking you could be in charge of the bread rolls today. That way you have something to do. That way you have something to do." I smiled. I said, "Of course, that sounded wonderful." I asked where she kept her baking things. She pointed to a cabinet and went back to her own preparations. And I stood there with my coffee and I thought, she means well. She is not trying to assign me a corner. She is just a person with a plan who is offering me a role in it. I told myself that 3 more times before noon. By 2 o'clock, the house had filled. Her cousin, a loud, warm man named, I'll call him what he was. Her cousin arrived with his wife and their teenage daughter. The aunt came next, small and silver-haired, who kissed my daughter-in-law on both cheeks and then looked at me and said, "And you must be the mom." The neighbors came last, a couple my son's age who brought a bottle of wine and a tin of caramel corn, and made themselves immediately comfortable in the way of people who have been in this house many times before. I had been there 2 years ago for a weekend. This was my 3rd visit in 8 years. They all seemed to know each other. Not just know, belong. They had the shorthand of people who have shared ordinary Tuesdays, not just holidays. They referenced things, a party in the spring, a renovation, a dog that had passed, and my son moved through all of it with ease, laughing, refilling glasses, belonging. I sat in the chair nearest the kitchen door and I watched. I want to be precise here because I don't want to make this into something it wasn't. No one was cruel to me. No one said anything unkind. I was included in conversations. I was asked questions. Her aunt told me I had kind eyes and I said thank you and meant it. But there is a particular kind of loneliness in being in a room full of people who love someone you love, and realizing that the version of him they know is fuller than the one you have access to. They knew what he ordered at the neighborhood bar. They knew about the time he fixed their sprinkler at 9 o'clock on a weeknight. They knew the small dailiness of him, and I was visiting. Dinner was served at 5. My daughter-in-law had outdone herself. Honestly, she had. The table was beautiful, the food was extraordinary, and she accepted the compliments with a graciousness that I genuinely admired. My son made a toast. He said he was grateful for good food and good people. He looked around the table. He did not look at me when he said it. I'm not sure he meant it that way. I am sure it happened. Afterward, when the plates were being cleared, my daughter-in-law asked if I could take over watching the rolls, which were doing a second warming in the oven. She and her cousin's wife were going to start on the dessert assembly. I said, of course. I went to the kitchen. I turned the oven down slightly and stood there in the kitchen alone, listening to the voices and laughter from the next room, and I thought, I drove 7 hours for this, not in anger. The thought came, clear and plain, the way true things do when you're standing in a quiet kitchen at the end of something. I thought, I drove 7 hours to watch my son be happy in a life I am not part of, and I didn't know, yet, what to do with that. After dessert, people drifted. Her cousin and his family left first. The neighbors stayed another hour. The aunt fell asleep in the armchair, sweetly, her chin dropping forward, and no one disturbed her. My son and his wife cleaned up together in the kitchen with a teamwork that was almost choreographed. He scraped, she loaded, she wiped, he dried, and I watched that too. And I thought, they are good together. Whatever else is true, they are good together. That should have been enough. That is what I kept telling myself that night as I lay in the guest room in the dark, listening to the house settle. They are good together. He is happy. That is what you wanted. That is what every mother wants. But I also thought, when did I become a guest in my son's life? When did I become the woman he thinks to invite, rather than the woman he thinks of? There is a difference. It took me until I was 64 years old to understand there is a difference. The next morning, Friday, I came downstairs to find my son alone in the kitchen. My daughter-in-law had gone for an early run. He was making eggs. He offered to make me some. I said yes. We sat at the kitchen table and for a little while it was just us. The way it used to be when he was young and we'd have breakfast together before school while the rest of the house was quiet. I thought, this is what I came for. This. He asked how I was doing. Really? I mean, he asked the way people ask when they want to know. I told him I was all right. I told him the house was lonely sometimes, that I'd been doing a watercolor class at the community center, that Agnes had a new dog that came and visited me in the garden. He listened. He nodded. Then he said, "Mom, I feel bad we don't call more." I looked at my eggs. I said, "I know you're busy." He said, "We are, but I know it's not an excuse." I looked up at him then. He was 41 years old and he looked so much like his father in that moment. The same set to his jaw, the same thing happening behind his eyes when something cost him something. I wanted to say, "I have been waiting for you to look at me like this for 4 years." I wanted to say, "Do you know that I memorized your laugh the last time I heard it because I wasn't sure when I'd hear it again?" I said, "I just miss you." He said, "I know." That was the whole conversation, just that. But here is the thing about "I know." When someone who loves you says "I know" to something true, it can mean everything or it can mean nothing, depending on what they do next. I have learned at 64 to wait and see which one it is before I decide how to feel. I drove home on Saturday morning. I stopped once at a rest area outside of Chattanooga and I sat in the car for a while, not crying, just sitting. The way you do when something has happened that you don't have a word for yet. I had not been unkind in that house. I had made the bread rolls. I had cleared my plate. I had said thank you for having me. I had not asked for anything, and I had come home more alone than when I left. That January, something changed in me. Not dramatically. It wasn't a moment, the way people describe moments of clarity like a bell being rung. It was more like a slow adjustment, a recalibration. The kind that happens when you've been looking at something for a long time, and suddenly you see it properly. I stopped waiting for my son to call. I started calling people I had let drift. An old friend from the school where I'd worked. I'll call her what she was, my old colleague. A woman I'd eaten lunch with 3 times a week for 11 years and lost track of after I retired. I called her on a Tuesday afternoon and we talked for 2 hours. She had moved to Asheville. She was doing pottery. She laughed the way I remembered and I thought, I forgot that I have a whole life that has nothing to do with waiting. I signed up for 2 more classes at the community center. I started going to the early morning walk group in the park. I was the oldest one by about 15 years and they were very kind to me about it. I started going every week. In March, my son called. He sounded the same as always, bright, a little rehearsed, catching me up on small things. He mentioned they were thinking about coming up in the summer. He said his wife wanted to see the farmer's market, the one downtown. I said that sounded nice. I said I'd love to see them. After I hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. I realized I hadn't checked the call length the way I used to, counting the minutes to see how much of his time I'd been given. I just talked to my son and then hung up and moved on with my afternoon. That was new. That was something. The thing I haven't told you yet is about the woman I met at the walk group. Her name was Lynette, and she was 67, a retired pharmacist, and she had a way of saying exactly what she meant without apology that I found startling and then deeply refreshing. She walked fast for someone with bad knees and she carried a thermos of black coffee, and she had 3 grandchildren who appeared on her phones constant mid-conversation, small urgent faces asking for things. She and I started this walking at the same pace without discussing it. Some people just match. One morning in April she asked me how my family was. I started to give the answer I always give. Fine, my son is in Atlanta, he's doing well, and then something stopped me. I looked at her, this woman I'd known for 6 weeks. This woman who had not grown up with me and owed me nothing, and I told her the truth. I told her about Thanksgiving, about the bread rolls, about something to do, about sitting near the kitchen door and watching my son move through a life I was peripheral to. I told her about the 7-hour drive home and the rest stop outside Chattanooga. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Did you ever ask him to call more?" I said I had, in my way. Hints, suggestions, the kind of asking that lets people pretend they didn't hear. She said, "That's not asking, that's hoping." I thought about that for a long time. She said, "My daughter and I went 4 years barely speaking. You know what changed it? I stopped performing for her. I stopped being the version of myself that was adjusted for her comfort. I just started being myself and letting her decide if she wanted to be around that." I asked her what her daughter decided. She said, "She came around. But it took time, and I had to be okay with the time it took. I had to fill my life so full that I wasn't just sitting there waiting for her to show up in it." I have thought about that conversation almost every day since. The summer visit happened. My son and my daughter-in-law came in July and stayed for 4 days. We went to the farmer's market. My daughter-in-law found a small pottery piece she liked, and I bought it for her. Not because I was trying to win anything, but because she lit up when she saw it, and I liked watching her light up. There was something between us in that moment that was simpler than all the complexity that had come before it. My son and I had time alone on the second evening, sitting on the back porch while his wife was on a call inside. The lightning bugs were out. It was the kind of summer night that has no agenda. He said, out of nowhere, "I'm sorry we're not better at this." I didn't ask him what he meant. I knew what he meant. I said, "I know." And then, because I had been practicing honesty all spring, I said, "I'd like to hear from you more. Not because I need something from you. Just because you're my son and I like knowing how your days are going." He didn't say, "I know" this time. He said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. But he called the next week and the week after that. And the calls are not long. 15 minutes, 20 sometimes. And they are still a little awkward, the way things are when you're rebuilding the ordinary after it's been neglected. But they are real. They are not rehearsed. I am not waiting for them the way I used to wait. They come and I'm glad, and then I go back to the rest of my life, which has gotten, I want to say this carefully, because it surprises me still, which has gotten genuinely full. Lynette and I walk every Tuesday and Thursday. I am finishing a small watercolor painting of the cardinal I saw out my son's kitchen window the morning after I arrived, the one my husband would have loved. Agnes brings her dog over on Sunday afternoons and we sit in the garden and let the dog think he's important, which he is. I still make the bread rolls at Thanksgiving. But I make them in my own kitchen now, and I bring them with me, and they arrive already done, already perfect, and no one has to find me something to do. I think about what Lynette said, about filling your life so full that you're not just waiting. I think about the woman I was standing in that kitchen at Thanksgiving, pressing fork tines into pastry crust, listening for a son who wasn't listening for me. I don't blame him. I am trying, at 64, to understand that people who love each other can still fail each other in small, quiet ways, over and over, without meaning to. That love does not automatically translate into attention. That you can be someone's whole world in their early life, and become, slowly, one element among many, and that this is not abandonment. It is just the particular grief of being a parent, which no one warns you about when they hand you that small, complete person at the beginning. What I know now is this. I do not want to be peripheral to my own life while waiting to be central to someone else's. I want to be the cardinal on the fence post, present, still, worth noticing. Whether or not anyone is standing at the window, that part is not up to me.